All right, everybody, I want to welcome you to a very important live stream. My name is Cyrus Janssen. We've got a special show in store for you today as we are talking about a very big geopolitical story that is really going to set the tone for 2026. This is, of course, Greenland. We see the mining industry is growing very fast. It's a very bullish industry right now. And I think many of our guests and our viewers across the world are very interested in geopolitics. They're very interested in certainly investing and seeing where the next opportunities are. So I've got two amazing guests that I'm really excited to bring into the show, and I'm going to introduce them as we fill out our panel this morning. The first is going to be Patrick Lancaster. Now, many of you might follow Patrick Lancaster for many years now. He is one of the best independent journalists in the world, covering a variety of different wars and scenarios, but he's most predominantly giving us live updates on the ground in between Ukraine and Russia. An incredible journalist, is American, speaks fluent Russian, and really is giving us a lot of these reports that you're not going to be able to see. So he's an independent war journalist, YouTuber reporting from conflict zones around the world with firsthand experience covering military operations, geopolitics, and great power competition. We're going to bring Patrick into the show. Patrick, how are you today?
Pretty good, Cyrus. Really happy to be on with both of you. I think it's going to be a great show.
Absolutely. It absolutely will be. We've got a really exciting show, and I'm so excited the knowledge that we're going to be able to share with our guests. And to really help us with that is our next guest is Mr. Craig Parry. He's a special expert, and he's a strategic mining executive and a U.S. critical minerals champion, recognized for building major mining companies and advancing projects vital to national security, industrial supply chains, and long-term resource independence. And we are going to bring, let me see. Sorry, there we go. Let's bring Craig into the stream. Craig, how are you? You're joining us from Vancouver, Canada today. How are you, sir?
G'day, fellas. Very, very well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, we've completed our panel this morning. And, one of the biggest storylines that we've seen to start 2026 certainly was Greenland and continues to be Greenland. We saw the president, Donald Trump, actually going with a very aggressive stance to start with, saying that the United States absolutely must have Greenland. It's going to even potential use military force to take that country. We know that Greenland is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. It is, by that regards, a NATO member. And there was certainly a rift, between the United States and Europe. But I think there's a much larger geopolitical story here. And this is really why we wanted to bring in our guest today to discuss this, because our question is, why Greenland? Why is it so important? Why is it so strategic? Obviously, there's military operations. We've got the Arctic Sea there. We've got the Arctic Sea that's also the snow is melting, the ice is melting. So the shipping lanes are becoming much more accessible. We see a lot of trade between Russia and China, these Arctic shipping lanes, minerals there. There's so many things in play. And so I'm going to start this stream off with asking Patrick. Patrick, I'd like to kind of get your opening from Greenland and, kind of coming from the Russian perspective here, because I know your expertise is really on Ukraine and Russia. I'd like to get your thoughts on, these first couple of weeks as we started the new year, what your thoughts are and how you're viewing the situation.
All right. Yeah. Great. Thanks, Cyrus. Yeah, as you said, my specialty is with Russia. And in fact, right now, I'm not far from the Russia-Ukraine war front line. As you can see behind me, I've got a few, you could say, souvenirs from different battlegrounds that I've been in. And I'm regularly, as you said, covering the battle here. But things, as you said, are more strategic in the overall geopolitics as far as Greenland goes. And if you look at what Trump is doing, it's not just riling up people in the EU, it's also getting a big response from Russia, because it doesn't only affect the United States and Greenland and Denmark, it affects the overall military strategy across the world and, of course, the Arctic. I mean, Russia is a country that has the most land mass in the Arctic, the longest shoreline in the Arctic. So if Trump and the United States does make a move on Greenland, it's going to definitely shake things up in a big way. I mean, we're talking about the critical trade routes and other routes from the U.S. to Europe. And as you said, the routes are getting bigger and expanding. And if we look at the actual Arctic race, you could say, Russia has been winning. Not only did they have the most territory, landmass, and area of shoreline, as I said, they've also got the biggest fleet of icebreakers in the world. And not only the most, they've got the best, including the nuclear icebreakers. And it looks like Trump in the United States wants to start catching up. And these icebreakers are really a strategic thing in the Arctic. I mean, they make new routes, keep routes open, both militarily and for trade, but most important, militarily. And not only will this affect on the ground and on the water, this also affects things that might be flying through the air. The early warning systems are going to be very different if the United States controls Greenland. They're going to have a lot more early warning. And it's the timelines of the early warning are going to be completely changing. The naval access, and of course, whatever the United States can do with Greenland itself. I think Craig might have a little bit more to say about what's under Greenland. But as far as the military goes and Russia, this is a big game changer if it happens. It completely changes the northern military strategy of Russia and the United States, of course, and many other countries. And this is going to be something that Russia is going to be reacting to in a big way if it does happen, and possibly preemptively as well.
Right. Greg, I'd like to bring you in to get your thoughts, because you bring in incredible knowledge, to the mining industry, obviously, but also I know that you've lived in China for 2 years. You were with Rio Tinto, working on mining projects over there. I think you've got a really good expertise here. Let me get your thoughts on, how you've seen the first couple of weeks go, in relation to Greenland and these geopolitical, stories that we've seen emerge over the last couple of weeks with Trump and the European Union trying to work out a deal, for Greenland.
Yeah, thanks, Cyrus, and really good to join you and Patrick. And Patrick's fascinating what you're up to over there. I'm so very impressed with what you're doing. Really on the front line, very, very impressive. But yeah, look, I'm a geologist by trade. I've spent 30 years in the industry. I've had the great fortune of finding some of the world's great deposits. My team and I, as a geologist, I've got some bad news for you about Greenland.
Yeah.
It's very, very clear to me that this is a geopolitical situation and approach that Trump's taking there. There's little to do with rare earth metals and other metals there in Greenland. 85% of Greenland's covered in ice. So that's very, very hard to prospect under. And, we might be several hundred years away from finding anything serious under that ice mass. And then around that very narrow coastal belt, there's been some prospecting, and people talk about the metallogeny, the endowment of Greenland as being massive, but it's really been very much unexplored. There's been some obvious standout discoveries around the coast where they outcrop, but it's had such little exploration that who knows what's there really. It certainly has a lot of potential. So I think what that means is that, whilst Trump and the White House may be thinking, this will be a great source for these metals in the future, that's a 50-year sort of proposition. So to me, it's very much a geopolitical situation, a bargaining chip, it's very important. I'm sitting here in Vancouver today with this beautiful Vancouver weather that we get. We've been talking here in Canada about being under the Golden Dome, and of course, the first thing you get to in a missile trajectory coming from Russia into the US you hit Greenland, and then you hit Canada. And so to me, it's very, very clear that that's what this is all about. It's not about minerals that has potential in the future. I should say that the US has a vast amount of mineral deposits that have been underexplored, understudied, and underdeveloped. Partly because of the mineral process, mineral title situation and the permitting process for projects there. So the US has enough, it and its, I might say fast dwindling allies have enough metal to do what they need in the future, but not enough work's been done, not enough support's been done to encourage that.
Right. No, I agree with you. And, I was doing a lot of research on this. I came across a very interesting article that was talking about the Arctic Circle and just the simple fact of, so much of exactly like you said, Craig, is that in Greenland, when we look at the actual land, a lot of that is above the Arctic Circle. So you're talking about some of the harshest weather conditions in the world. And then, like you said, 85% of the country is under an ice sheet. Sometimes it's about a mile thick. So the ideas of building the infrastructure needed to actually break through a mile of ice and actually extract those resources. I agree with you. I think it would be probably 50 years away before you could feasibly do something like that. So there's a lot more, bigger geopolitical stories here. I think it goes back to the Arctic shipping lines. I think it goes back to submarines, Russia, China. Again, these waters are going to become more and more clear. It's not going to just be all ice. There's going to be able to have these, like Patrick said, you have these huge icebreakers that are going to be able to go through there. I think certainly, there's a lot of, transport between Russia and China. And I think that's probably where the U.S. is looking at. And I think it's an interesting one. Craig, you mentioned the fast dwindling allies of the United States. And I think that's where there was a move from the Trump administration to start very aggressively, certainly threaten a military action. I think realistically that never really was actually an option for Trump. I think he knew deep down, you can't, and send the United States military into Greenland. That of course would, almost, be the end of NATO, if you will, and really be an unprecedented attack against a NATO member. But I think what we're looking at is definitely more the geopolitics. And I think even as of this morning, we saw a news headline was saying that Denmark and the United States have, they're making progress on what they're talking about. It looks like some kind of deal will be made in the regards to, all right, we're going to be able to, work together. For example, if the United States government wants a piece of land for military expansion, they're going to be able to do that. Of course, the United States already has a military base in Greenland as we speak. Actually, during the Cold War, at the height of the Cold War, I think the United States had up to about 15 bases there. They had a very large presence in Greenland, which, of course, after the Soviet Union, they started to, bring that number down because the threat wasn't there from the Soviet Union. So yeah, I think it's a lot more of a geopolitical play. And I think the other interesting thing there was some geologists like yourself, Craig, that said, if there was kind of some, gold at the end of the rainbow in Greenland, private equity would have probably been there, right? Private capital doesn't miss opportunity. You guys would have been mining there and extracting those resources. So I don't think it's going to be as big of an opportunity as far as mineral resources. But like you said, though, I think between the United States and Canada, this is certainly what we've seen in the industry, a lot of great mining projects and a big need for independence, I think, is what we're seeing. I mean, this is certainly the move from the Trump administration saying that, look, we want to make sure that we are mining in our own backyard, between the United States and Canada, extracting these resources. And there's a lot of potential right there.
Yeah, and I can weigh in there. The US, I think, is now very much recognised that it hasn't done enough on that front, and indeed the entire Western Hemisphere, the Western world. There's been countries like Canada, of course, and Australia that have been very pro-mining and pro-mining development, and done a good job. And so you've got, it's sort of writ large at the moment with the USD coming off. You're seeing those Canadian dollar, the Aussie dollar, their commodity currencies, they're rising in value against the USD at the moment because we have in those countries done a good job of advancing our mineral projects and becoming a key supplier to the world of critical minerals. There was a very interesting thing happened there about 15 days ago. A fella called David Copley, who is he was part of Trump's first administration. He went back, I think, to Newmont and worked as an executive with the world's biggest gold mining company. He's now back with the Trump administration. He was part of the National Energy Dominance Council. The National Energy Dominance Council, of course, is looking at how the US, secures its energy and mineral future. And of course, Venezuela, I think, is a key part of that, less so Greenland. He spoke at the Saudi Future Minerals Forum there 15 days ago. And what he said was very, very important. The US has not done enough to look after its mining companies in the last 50 years, and hence it's fallen so far behind China, not only in critical minerals and critical mineral mining and exploration, development, mining and processing. There's no serious ability to compete with China. And of course, if China cuts off the taps for those metals, we are in a world of hurt. And that's one thing I'd say to you, is that we are at war now, and it's a mineral war. It's a little bit like the 70s with oil and gas. We're in the same situation with minerals now. And of course, these critical minerals, like if you look at, for example, an F-35 fighter jet, that's basically a flying periodic element chart that needs a bit of everything. And the US has done no work on that. So we're in a tremendously difficult position. We've got a lot of catch up to China to do if we're to do it. And David Copley got on stage and said, we've really done a disservice to our mining companies. You're going to see a lot more support and interaction from guys like me. You're going to have an open door. And I can tell you, I just got back from a trip to Juneau, Alaska, where we've got a major new copper project in my company, Vizsla Copper. I spent an hour with the governor of Alaska. I met 6 different senators. I met the commissioner for mines, the commissioner for transport, and the commissioner for environment. I only acquired that project 6 weeks ago, or 2 months ago now, and they had an open door. I spent a full day wandering the halls of the Capitol. So the US is getting it. What David Copley was saying there in Saudi 2 weeks ago is very much true. It's an open door policy. If you're in the mining business right now in the US, please come in and we will look after you. And, he went on to say that, the US realises the position it's in, and they're going to have to get permitting times for things like, if you make a discovery, it typically takes you from discovery to production between 15 and 20 years for a mining project. Now, if you go back 20 years during the last boom, that time horizon was typically 10 years. One of the things we do at Inventor Capital is we pride ourselves on being able to go from discovery to development in under 5 years, and we've done that consistently across our projects, but not many people do that. Well, David Copley saying that we want to get permitting review times for example, environmental permitting down to a month. Well, now it's about 5 years. At Skeena Resources, where I'm the lead director, I've been the chairman there for the past 10 years. It's taken us, this is an old mine, we're refurbishing it, rejuvenating it, cleaning up the environment, but it's still taken us 6 years to move from acquisition through to, and it was mostly the environmental permitting. Certainly First Nations engagement's important, but it takes a long time, and that's going to change in the US, and I think they're on the right, making the right steps to really fix that situation.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. Gentlemen, I'm just going to bring up a graph. Excuse me, Craig, it's going to kind of cut your head off here when I bring this on screen. But I just want to, I shared this earlier, and this is a really interesting graph to really understand the geopolitics and exactly what Craig was hinting at earlier. If we look at this graph, it kind of ranks on a scale of 1 to 10, how much leverage Trump has against countries around the world. So, for example, if you see on the far left, you're looking at China, would be a 1 out of 10. And this actually means that Trump does not have as much leverage against China when we compare that to, say, on the right side of the scale, which would be 10, which it would be Venezuela. And so we saw how Trump could certainly exert a lot of power against Venezuela, obviously launching a military operation, capturing Nicolas Maduro, bringing him back to New York City. But what we saw, and I'll just bring Craig back on the screen here. So if you look at that scale, I think this is really important for everybody to understand, is that, just to kind of piggyback on what Craig said just there, is that you look at the F-35, you look at so many of these vital minerals that are needed in the United States. I think I was reading like a F-35, like 40% of it is titanium, so that's one element. But like you said, it's a periodic table. You need so many of these rare earths. The other interesting fun fact that I've done in my research is that there's a lot of countries that can process the rare earths. They can process it to 99%, 99.5, but only China can really process it to 99.9. And that's the real difference, is that ultra clean processing. In order to get it to, for example, when we look at microchips, for example, you need these elements at the purest level to make these high-end things. You look at the armament in the military. So there's so many uses in here. And I think, that's really great to hear. The United States is actually moving forward and trying to streamline these processes, certainly trying to get them, what used to take 6 months, let's get it done in 6 weeks. We need to really streamline this. And I think we've also seen that in the markets, right? We've seen this with, silver and gold and precious metals and resources. All of these are booming, right? We see actually the United States dollar is falling. Like Craig had mentioned, these commodity-backed currencies like the Aussie dollar, the Canadian dollar actually gaining against the U.S. dollar, and all of this is related to geopolitics. And I think this is why it's so important to have these live streams and study geopolitics, study what's going on. Patrick, oh yeah, go ahead, Craig.
No, I was just going to ask you guys a question. This fascinates me because it has occurred to me that, with Venezuela and Venezuelan oil under US control, they have the ability to have a material impact now. Of course, the shale gas boom did this, and they saw the upshot of that, the benefits of all of that. But, with the US now, is secure for oil, certainly not minerals. We've still got a long way to go for that. But they're working hard on it. But, it strikes me that they could really flood the market with cheap Venezuelan oil, which will have a serious impact on Russia and its ability to fund its budget. And then, of course, Iran, you can play a slow game there. Is that how things will play out? That, over the next couple of years, the US will reduce the price of oil by production and thereby control the market and have a detrimental impact to some of these other countries that are oil producers.
Patrick, I'll let you chime in, buddy. What do you think on that, and where Russia's kind of stance on that?
Oh, we lost you, Patrick.
Patrick, your audio's out, buddy. 1 second. Okay, I'll take that question.
Yeah.
And we'll let Patrick get his audio working again. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting one, Greg, as far as that's a big background. Patrick, are you good? Testing. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, because I think that's definitely an option there for the United States, and it'd be a really interesting one to see if for example, if they are able to extract all that oil from Venezuela, and the problem is it's a very heavy crude oil, right? It really needs a very heavy refining, and actually the United States is set up for that, right? I think the oil refineries in Houston, Texas are actually probably the best in the world for refining that very, very heavy crude that really needs that ultra refinement. And so I think that's the scenario we're looking at, that it would certainly reduce the price of oil, and it would probably be a big challenge, to China and Russia. And so there's a lot of these, geopolitical stories, that are as a result of this. And, we have yet to see what's going to happen with Venezuela, because, we do know that although Maduro is gone, actually his vice president has now stepped in. So there hasn't really been a structural change in the actual leadership of Venezuela. Yes, we've removed Maduro, but essentially the government is exactly the same, right? We haven't seen a structural change there. And then we're also seeing, I think, a little bit of hesitance from the U.S. oil companies. I think it was Chevron, or maybe it was ExxonMobil, I forget which one, it was, but one of their executives was saying, look, if we're going to go in and we're going to invest, I mean, again, this is going to be multi-$100 billion investments. We need to get these guarantees from the U.S. government because, they've had problems, right? As far as building infrastructure there, having that taken over, having to stop, these private companies, or these publicly traded companies rather, they have to deliver that value back to the shareholders, right? So there's a lot of speculation there. So I don't know how it's going to phase out, but Patrick, what do you think from the Russian perspective? I think, Russia obviously depends on oil, for a big part of their economy. They're exporting a lot. They're a very big producer. What is your thoughts, from the Russian perspective and how they're looking at this?
We've got a few real dramas there. I can tell you, as someone who discovered a coal deposit and built a coal mine in Russia, I've sort of across a little bit of that.
Yeah, tell us your perspective, Greg.
Yeah, look, of course, Russia is one of the world's great, mineral-rich nations, and they have, very much self-sufficient. I think that they've done a great job in Russia over the years of exploring and finding deposits. And so that, that's another serious competitor to the US in that space. And I think I said up front, we are at war for minerals right now. If you look at copper, for example, in the next 18 years, we need to mine as much copper as has been mined in the last 10,000 years of human history. And I can tell you, it's not out there. There's no way. We're going to see extraordinarily high copper prices. I think $30, $40 per pound is. So we're a very, very west. China, Russia, a little bit self-sufficient in that front. China's an interesting situation. Of course, they've done huge amounts of work in Africa, and so they can get those products out of Africa. Russia's self-sufficient for minerals. Here in the West, we've been caught flat-footed. We're in a hell of a position, and we're in a war for minerals at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Patrick, are you back with us?
Yeah, I think I'm back. Sorry about that, guys.
No worries. All right. Let's bring you back in, Patrick. Share your thoughts.
Yeah, let me catch you up a little bit. On the overall view of Russian resources, I can comment kind of directly on the area I'm in now and in the war zone. Just about 5 days ago, I was actually down in one of now Russia's mines, actually the deepest coal mine in the Donbass, in the war zone. I didn't have much to really compare it to at the time, but it was about 1,350 meters straight down and a trip of about 6 kilometers, 3 there, 3 back, to get to the bottom part. And it really showed me how Russia is expanding its sphere of influence and control of resources. Now, this isn't something that's just been happening in the last 4 years since Russia came into the Donbass, but it's, of course, been happening longer. And not only does Russia control these mines here in the Donbass, in the war zone, that the Western law of Ukraine, United States, and Europe considers part of Eastern Ukraine, but Russian law says it's part of Russia. The one thing that seems different between these mines and these areas that Russia controls here is, regardless, how popular the sentiment and the opinion is in the West, the fact on the ground in the majority of these areas is that Russia has the support of the locals. I mean, the vast majority of the people here view themselves as Russians. I mean, this, started as an internal thing and just got bigger and bigger with Russia fully coming in 2022. Now, that's a huge difference than what the situation is with Greenland and the United States. I mean, people in Greenland aren't claiming the United States as their own. So the United States definitely needs to be careful because they're claiming, wrongdoing by Russia. Like, let's say in 2014, with taking control of Crimea with the support of the locals. And that's not going to happen with, well, most likely with Greenland, unless there's a really interesting deal that happens. Of course, as you said, Cyrus, it's not really likely that the United States is going to make a military action and come in. But if the United States is able to gain the support of the locals, whether it's monetarily or otherwise, then that's probably, of course, going to be the best thing instead of forcing something on a local population. Obviously, that's, how wars are won without becoming wars, and how, the borders change of different countries. It's when the locals want it to happen. And that's really should be how it is the right of self-determination, whether it's in Donbass or whether it's in Greenland. I mean, that should be the way things are done, I believe.
Right. No, I agree with you. I think there was an interesting, kind of tactic from Trump. There's certainly a theory, that what he does is he likes to, really push you to the extreme measure and then kind of bring you back in the middle to negotiate. And I think that's what we've seen with Greenland. I think that ultimately, I don't think that Greenland becomes part of the United States. I think that was a very aggressive move from Trump. He almost goes to the polar opposite, right? It's like, hey, we're gonna take Greenland. It's going to become American. These people are going to become a U.S. territory, similar to a Guam or a Puerto Rico. The U.S. Virgin Islands, we're going to be, are they going to become the next territory? There was everything like, oh, we're going to pay the people $100,000 each. We're going to pay them $1 million each. We're going to give this a financial incentive. But I think that, from the latest polls, over 85% of Greenlanders, certainly wanted to remain in the Kingdom of Denmark. I think that there's a lot said to be American, but however, a U.S. territory does not usually have the same success. We look at the average GDP produced, per capita. We look at, the poverty rates, actually very high, poverty rates in a lot of these U.S. territories. So I think under the Kingdom of Denmark, again, it's a small nation. It's 57,000 people. I mean, that's a tiny population. It is the least dense place in the world, considering the landmass of Greenland. But I think I think we see Trump going to the extreme, and then also I think kind of going into a larger geopolitical one. We've seen the United States, very interesting enough, we can maybe touch on this, is that the U.S. has actually changed its national strategy. And I don't know if you guys are aware, so back last October, the U.S. government, released a document for its foreign policy, and it actually has said that they're going to be retreating from Asia. They don't actually view China and Russia as the predominant threat anymore. And I think that's what we've seen in this pivot in 2026, is that they're actually trying to focus more on their own backyard. And I think this is, the Don Roe doctrine, with Donald Trump, certainly trying to have more influence in the sphere of Western Hemisphere, right? So I think it's almost saying, look, we know that the United States, that we know that China is going to be the dominant force in the Pacific region. I mean, that's just what it is, because it's based on geography. Obviously, China is the predominant player there. China's number one trading partner is actually the ASEAN network, the Association of Southeast Asian countries. And so that's where China's predominant trade is growing. So even when we look at the trade war, which was the main topic of 2025, we actually see a trade surplus from China, right? Over $1.2 trillion. Yes, exports to the United States has gone down, but China has been able to replace that, as Craig had mentioned earlier. You look at the tremendous network that they've built in Africa, for example. So you look at their network that they've built in Southeast Asia. This is where China's trade is going and how the world is shifting very much. So I think that's where Donald Trump is now saying, look, we want to be the predominant power in the Western Hemisphere. So we're going to have our strategic interest in Greenland, which I think we've now come to the conclusion, not really about minerals or rare earths. It's more about the shipping lines, just the presence there. Craig had mentioned earlier the Golden Dome, right? If there was to be an attack, if there was a missile fired at some point, that would certainly go over Greenland, over Canada, into the United States. So I think this is the shift that we're seeing. We've also seen Donald Trump say, look, we're going to go after Cuba next, right? There's going to be a change there coming very soon. Does that mean a military intervention? Does it mean some type of operation? We don't know. It's hard to tell with President Trump. Sometimes he says something, he doesn't mean it. We don't really know. Speaks off the cuff very often. We've heard threats against obviously, we've seen Venezuela. We've heard threats against Colombia, even Mexico, potentially with the cartels and the drug war. So I think what we're seeing with the United States is a big shift. I think it's shifting away from, Russia and China predominantly as this big threat. I think that's what they've seen before was, okay, we need to have a presence against China, a presence against Russia, a presence against Iran. We got to be in the Middle East. We got to be in the backyard. Now it's like, let's consolidate. But it kind of brings us full circle here, gentlemen, because like Craig has said, and I think it is really about the minerals and just the need to do this domestically. That's an interesting stat, though, that we need to mine as much copper in the future as we've mined in the last 10,000 years. Greg, what is the main uses for copper that we're seeing that from the United States? Is it because of the military? Is it because of that? That's what we're needed, or is it even things like semiconductors or the copper that we need in the house? Is that what is the main sources driving this huge need for copper specifically?
Yeah, and you make a good point there, because of course he did write the book on it, the art of the deal, and he's completely outbluffed and outplayed, most leaders around the world, perhaps even Xi Jinping. So let's see. But, and of course, key there is, and I do this when I do a mining deal, like I don't want to be the first bidder on something or put the first offer up. Right. That if you have to, then you go in big and, you ask for way more than you really want. Well, that's what he's done, I think, with Greenland, and they're going to come to a very amicable solution to that. So brilliant work there. You can say what you like about Donald Trump, or as my kids call him, McDonald Trump. He's outplayed them, outmaneuvered everyone there, and certainly done the same in Venezuela. And gee, what a military! Some of that technology that they've got is just incredible. Copper, right. Look around you. If you look here, like there's nothing that much in this room apart from perhaps the drywall that doesn't have copper that's important to it. The lights simply don't come on. We will starve in the dark if we don't have copper. It's the most critical mineral. It's the biggest metal market on the planet. I think it's a $300 billion per annum trade. And I can tell you, if we're in a world of hurt, as I say, we're at war for minerals because of the lack of exploration and investment in the sector in the last, not only 15 years, but really the last 50 years. And you look at things like rates of discovery, if the market at the moment is about 27 million tonnes per annum. The biggest producer of copper is Chile. They produce about 20 to 25% of the world's copper at the moment. And the biggest mine there is a thing called Escondida that's half owned by Rio Tinto and BHP. It was discovered back in the late 80s. It now produces 1 million tonnes of copper per annum. We haven't found another one of those in 50 years. If we're to keep up with the demand that's growing at the moment, and it's an interesting day today. I don't know whether you saw overnight, but copper futures jumped 60 cents, wow. About 12%. We're at all-time, I'm looking at the screen now, where are we? $6.20, that's an all-time high and going higher. So, we're in this price discovery phase, and we're finding out, the upshot of all of our failings, though, particularly over the last 15 years. Rates of discovery have dropped off. If you go back 15 years, to make a copper mine work, you had to have about 1% copper grade. So you're taking, for every ton you mine, you're getting out 10 kilos. There's a hell of a lot of work and energy goes into doing that. You've got to find them first. Nowadays, the average head grade of mined copper around the world is about 0.5%. So that's dropped off a cliff. You've seen the discovery rates drop off a cliff. And, to keep up with over the next 10 years, we're going to need another 10 Escondidas. And as I say, another one hasn't been found in 50 years. We are in a world of hurt. There's no way we can provide the copper that the world needs. So there's going to be a massive response in pricing. I think that we'll see incredibly high copper prices. We may see $30 or $40 per pound by the back end of this decade, and certainly today's pointing that way. Now, if you go back a couple of years ago when I was saying this, people said I was mad, and I also said that I thought silver would absolutely get to $100 in the not too distant future. Well, it's done it, in the last 6 months, it's gone from $30 or last 12 months, sorry, $30 all the way up to $117 today. I think that's going to keep going. I think we're going to see $400 or $500 silver again for those, because we haven't done enough work to develop these projects. So we're in a world of hurt. If the world wants to continue growing at 3% GDP growth per annum, we are going to need vast amounts more copper. So how do we solve for that, particularly in the West? Well, I think the White House is on the right track now, but we do need to encourage further investment. Prices will do that. The solution for low prices, high prices is high prices. But I think we're going to see a tremendous run up in copper prices that will encourage development. Now, given the timelines to go from discovery, well, firstly, make a discovery, that can be, some geologists never have the fortune of making a discovery, but
right.
It's a 20-year proposition to catch up to where we need to be, and so we're going to see very high prices in the not too distant future, and that will take care of that over a long time. But we'll have a sweet spot here where we'll have incredibly high prices for metals. And we should talk about silver as well, because it's a good proxy for the market more generally.
Yeah, I just want to add on that silver, because the interesting thing, Craig, is I just want to say, to really kind of validate what you've said is, we've got the receipts on you, because if you just type your name in on YouTube, you can look at videos from 2 years ago where you said, look, silver's going to go to $100. This is definitely going to happen. And so I think that's what brings a lot of value to our viewers here. That's why I want to bring your expertise to the show, because I think this is something that, Patrick and I really harp on in our videos. And it's a kind of a key message that I like to bring to my YouTube viewers as well, as saying, look, we study geopolitics because it moves the markets. And there's so many interesting storylines that are correlated to this, hence why, this will continue to be a very big theme. I mean, I think we're all feeling very bullish about the mining industry in 2026 and beyond. But again, you just kind of look at those simple things that you said, right? You look at copper. It's so vital to our world, and if we're going to keep expanding this GDP every year, and we look at China and how they're growing and expanding. I mean, there's only so much copper in the worworld, and so there's, like you said, there's that one project in Chile, and you're going to need another 10 of those, and we haven't found one yet. So there's going to be a big stretch there. But Patrick, chime in, my friend. I want you to add it in and let me know what you think.
Yeah, and to touch on the copper situation in the world. I mean, Chile being number one producer. Well, Russia is actually the second in the world for reserves, second only to China, and the sixth largest producer. So the separation between the West and Russia and other BRICS countries is quite big when it comes into the copper market.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that's kind of a continuous theme that we've seen, where China does have a lot of leverage there. There was an interesting, again, to kind of harp on that, is if we go back to October last year, there was a move from the Trump administration that said, okay, we are going to put about 20,000 Chinese companies on a national identity list, but basically means you're not allowed to transact with these companies. And China immediately responded by saying, look, we're going to actually stop the export of these rare earths. And immediately we saw the Trump administration, backtrack from that and actually come to work to a deal. So I think when you look at, there's a couple things, I think it's really important when we look at China and Russia, we see the reserves they have, we see the mining they have, the processing that they have. These are all really important things to understand, and why there's still some leverage, in these markets. I mean, even today, we still are importing a tremendous amount of uranium, monthly basis to fund the nuclear power plants that we have in the United States. We're not able to replace that. We cannot survive, without uranium from Russia. So even despite, if we go back, 3, 4, 5 years, of the conflict, between Russia and Ukraine, of course, we know this conflict's much larger than that, really going back to the early 90s. But, even if, where a lot of people say, okay, 2022 was the big inflection point and where it really escalated to another level. Throughout this entire time, the United States is importing actively a lot of uranium from Russia. And the goal with that is they said, hopefully by 27 or 28, we can reduce that dependence. But it really shows you just how it's not an easy thing to do. You can't just reroute these supply chains. You can't just be like, oh, you know what? We're not buying any more from Russia, right? You got to give a 5-year timeline, in order to try to reduce that dependence. But the problem that we've talked about as well, like, well, where do you go, right? Where's the next resource there?
And you touch on something important there. I've spent 20 years in the uranium space and been involved in the discovery of a couple of big deposits there at Next Gen Energy and ISO Energy. And I can, one of the things I've heard recently from the White House is that they are looking at implementing a strategic uranium reserve. And hence today, you've seen the uranium price spike up to $100 a pound. So that's on its way up as well. I'd love to give you a little anecdote about silver, because that indicates what all other metals are going to do in the next little while.
Yeah, please.
The revolution wasn't televised in the sense that the silver, China, the renewables energy race has been run and won, and China awarded the winner the gold medal last year. The other guys are still coming home very, very slowly. Angela Merkel's misadventure there with $1 trillion invested into solar, that's been a disaster. And, of course, now they're completely reliant on oil and gas from Russia. I don't know how that plays out for Germany, but it's not going to be good. And we're seeing that, the upshot of that very high energy prices. Australia shot itself in the foot as well, running, closing down coal-fired power plants and the like. I think my father pays about 10 times the price for his energy, power, electricity for his house. The winner was solar, and by a long mile. So last year, China installed 300 gigawatts of solar capacity. Now, a large nuclear power plant typically produces about 1 gigawatt. So China's been building the equivalent of nearly one major nuclear power plant in solar capacity per day. That's extraordinary. Now, the silver market is a market of, the demand is about 1.1 billion ounces per annum. Primary production, mine production is about 800 to 900 million ounces per annum. There's a little bit of recycling there. So let's say the market's in about 20% deficit at the moment. We've known this for a long time. And this is why I was saying a couple of years ago, it's coming. $100 silver is coming. At the moment, photovoltaics use about 20 to 25% of that silver supply. If China keeps developing solar panels and solar fields at the rate they're doing, you go to the back end of this decade, 4 short years away, the solar business is going to be using about 80 to 90% of the silver that's produced today.
Wow.
Now, at Vizsla Silver, we're in the middle of building what will be the largest silver mine in the world. That will produce the equivalent of about 12 million ounces per annum of silver. So the supply-demand gap at the moment is 200 million ounces. So we need 16 new silver mines of the scale that my team are building right now. And I can tell you that the discoveries aren't out there. There hasn't been enough work. And 70% of silver comes as a byproduct of copper production and other metal production. So those copper producers have limited incentive until you see higher copper production to bring on stream that production, which will contribute more silver. But there's no way we can keep up. So if you go out, if silver demand goes to 1.6, 1.7 billion ounces per annum in 4 years' time, which I think it will, and our primary production's half that, this is when you see $500 silver. That's coming, Cyrus. That is absolutely coming. And copper is in the same situation. So we've seen that happening in gold and now silver. The same is coming for copper. Gee, I'll tell you what, we're about to go through what Robert Friedland calls the revenge of the miners. Of course, you see, you look at Elon Musk, so our tech bros companies, and the crazy valuations they get. You're going to see that in mining writ large over the next 5 years. There's going to be a heck of a lot of billionaires in the mining space minted over that period of time.
Yeah. Well, Well, I'm glad we got the receipts. We're going to look back on this video. We've got the receipts here for Craig. And I think, again, I mean, I kind of keep harping on this, why we study geopolitics, why we study this. That's a fascinating statistic with China and the solar that they're building. And actually to kind of bring it into a broader US-China rivalry. And, this is something that I've said in a lot of my videos. When we look at the AI race, right? The artificial intelligence race, that's kind of the main thing that's in the headlines right now. That was probably the biggest key word in 2025. Everyone's talking AI. Of course, every business is using AI. Everything's about AI, but AI requires a tremendous amount of power and electricity. And so, it's very interesting. I saw this. I saw an article in the United States where this public golf course had sold for $1 million in like kind of rural Pennsylvania. And they were like, what's the valuation there? Like, there's nowhere near that, but it was just the perfect space to build data centers. And they needed that, because it was a very centrally located place to secure that location for many of the Americans' companies. And so they were like, we're going to pay literally whatever the price is, and we're going to outbid everybody by a ton, to secure that, because we need to have the data centers in order to do that. Well, the data centers actually goes back to the power and electricity. And that's actually another one. This is why we've seen the prices of electricity go up so high in the United States, because electricity production is not increased, but yet our demand for AI and our demand for data centers is going through the roof. So this is another very big thing to pay attention to in the future. And I think that's where, we've also seen some articles come out saying, look, China's going to win the AI race simply because they have more electricity. And that's certainly a theory, and we're going to see how that plays out. But Patrick, let's get your thoughts on, we're kind of coming to the end of our stream, gentlemen. We like to keep it right at about an hour. We've had an amazing chat. So I think, let's start to, kind of wrap up our final thoughts and what we see in kind of in the near term. I mean, Craig, you've done a great job of outlining, what the future is going to look like. And I appreciate it, those amazing insights. But Patrick, over to you first.
Yeah, Cyrus, I mean, I think it's pretty clear, as we all have said, that this is mainly about the military aspects and importance of Greenland. And, the fact is, Russia doesn't need Greenland. The US and NATO do need, and the need of it is expanding. Now, as I talked about just the readiness in the Arctic of Russia, like I said, how they have the largest fleet of icebreakers. Now, just to give a little bit of comparison, I didn't say before, it's not just so much the largest fleet, but you would expect the US to be kind of a little bit behind. No, it's about 40-2, and one of the US's 2 icebreakers is very aged. So there's a big gap in the readiness to navigate and explore the Arctic, and the U.S. is doing everything it can to catch up. And as the Arctic becomes more and more strategic, the U.S. is moving, and that's where Trump is headed, obviously.
Agreed. Craig, let's get your final thoughts on kind of our stream today. We've had an amazing chat, a lot of value. I want to just thank you and Patrick for coming on and providing this kind of insider knowledge on everything. And we'll give the final say to you.
Yeah, well, I've got to say, both of your content is fantastic stuff, and Patrick's out there, I'm really on a mission. I'm very impressed, and I wish you all the best there, mate. And you're at the front lines. But I would conclude by saying that we've seen over the past 100 years wars fought over oil, over energy, and I would say that we are at war right now globally for minerals and for shoring up our energy future, like you say, Patrick, for data centers, for EVs. We need replications of grids around the world. We can't carry that power capacity. So we are at war for copper, for silver, for all key minerals right at the moment. But that war's not really a bullets flying type of war that Patrick doesn't mind being in. This is more a war within ourselves, the environmental movement, various different interest groups, NGOs, the wars within itself, our ability to advance projects, mineral projects, and mining's got a bit of a dirty name. That's changing very quickly. We do things tremendously sustainably and safely nowadays. The wars within ourselves, we need to get our act together in the West, allow responsible development and rapid development of mineral projects right now, or we are done. China, Russia, have won the race.
Right. Yeah, I agree. Go ahead.
Jump in just a little add on to what I was saying. And just on my part of the whole Greenland aspect, like I do here in Russia and the Ukraine war zone, I try to get my viewers as much as possible without just talking from a distance, really show them what I see. And that's why, as we've talked about offline, Cyrus, I'm planning a trip to Greenland to get a little bit more in depth on what the locals have to say about the real situation. So it's not so much about looking at what the headlines are, but getting in depth with the local people, seeing how they live, what they live, and everything in between, and just really see what they want of their self-determination, as we said, because I think that's one thing that matters the most, rather than what the narrative is. Just like to get as in-depth as possible, and I'm definitely going to be headed that way and hopefully get a lot more information on the subject.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as well, I just want to say a big thanks to both you and Craig. It's really been great to be on, and hope to see you guys again shortly.
No, absolutely. Well, I think it's also a good time to kind of announce to everybody that we're going to actually be kind of continuing this and taking it to the next level next month. So, we're going to be going to Canada. So, Craig, we're going to be flying up to Vancouver. We're going to be meeting with you. We're going to be taking a helicopter up to one of your projects. And I think this is going to be a really amazing thing for our viewers out there, because I get so many emails and so many comments from people asking questions, wanting to learn more. I think the importance of this live stream and kind of our goal with this is really education, right? It's really trying to say, look, again, I love bringing that up. We got the receipts, right? 2 years ago, you had predicted silver is going to go to $100 an ounce. We know, looking at all of these things, as far as how China and Russia are developing, the resources they have, the energy that they're producing, there's a reason why Trump wanted to go into Venezuela and get that oil. There's a reason why Trump wanted to go to Greenland and kind of make a statement there. Again, he's not going to overtake the country, but we want to make sure that America is going to have some say in that part of the world, because it is in the Western Hemisphere. So all of these things are correlated. All of these things are really important to study. And I think we have a very knowledgeable viewership here that really enjoys learning that. So, Craig, I'm looking forward to seeing you next month in Vancouver, coming up there and spending some time and actually kind of producing some footage on the ground, looking at these mines, seeing, really recording some incredible content for our viewers that no one else is doing on YouTube. So again, this is the kind of the insights that you're going to be able to get, guys. So if you haven't already, make sure that you subscribe to Patrick and our YouTube channel, drop us a comment, but just make sure you're following these stories, because we're going to watch this rise up in all of these commodities. We're going to watch the copper and the uranium and the silver and gold continue to reach new heights in 2026. I couldn't agree more, Craig, with your statement that there's going to be a lot of billionaires made in the mining industry with these executives, because it's literally what the world's going to need right now in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're very much looking forward to hosting you. We've got a good program. We'll fly up in a chopper there and get you out in the field in the snowy plains up here in British Columbia on our newest discovery. And I'm very, very hopeful that we'll have made a new discovery as well, and we'll be able to take you through the whole exploration process and how that looks. And there's nothing quite like making a discovery, and hopefully we've got one up there for you to see.
That'd be amazing. That'd be amazing. Well, everybody, for Patrick and Craig, my name is Cyrus. Right. I want to thank you guys all for being here in this amazing stream. We look so much forward to, again, bringing you this amazing content when we go up to Vancouver, Canada, and up to the northern part of British Columbia where these mines are located. Not many people do that. I don't think any other YouTubers have been up there. So this is really going to be a groundbreaking event on YouTube, and we're so excited to share this with everybody. So everyone, thank you all for your incredible support. And we look forward to seeing you all in the next live stream very soon.